What would happen if? This is a question we have asked ourselves dozens of times over the course of our lives. But one thing remains true each time we ask it. It's often impossible to know with absolute certainty how we would react or what we would decide in any given situation until it actually happens. Furthermore, it's equally unlikely that we would ever be able to come up with all the things that could even happen to us in the future. The practice of scenario planning acknowledges this dilemma and gives us a thought-out way to consider its many implications. In today's session, we will take a look at the 4 phases of scenario planning, as well as its true purpose and numerous benefits. Scenario planning is an integral part of foresight in any organization. As Nonprofit Quarterly puts it, it's meant to help turn those what-if questions into what we will do if questions. So this is what we mean when we say that scenario planning is what gives us the ability to prepare for the future in a proactive rather than reactive manner. It provides us with an organized approach to thinking so that we can make more informed decisions to guide our clubs. Such planning also sets forth a path for envisioning possible futures and how our club can handle different crises as they arise. And perhaps most importantly, scenario planning helps us to deepen our understanding of the world and our organization's place in it. By the same token, we should also consider what does not constitute scenario planning. First and foremost, it is not predicting the future. It's impossible to come up with every situation that our clubs could face, let alone the multitude of solutions that go with each scenario. Therefore, we must acknowledge that scenario planning is not the road to take when we are looking for strategic planning or developing our budget. Scenario planning is also not a way to measure success. Experts from Nonprofit Quarterly caution us to stay away from phrases like best case scenario or worst case scenario so as to accurately manage our expectations. Finally, as leaders, we should be aware that it's not a one-time process. Like many other types of planning, it is something that will be and should be revisited frequently in order to ensure that new scenarios have been considered and different solution paths still make sense for the organization. There are many positives that support the necessity of scenario planning in an organization like ours. As we mentioned earlier, proper foresight gives us the benefit of having proactive responses during times of crisis ready rather than always being on the defensive with reactional responses. This is important to helping your leadership be ready for a plethora of hypothetical circumstances such as economic fluctuations, regulatory changes, and government growth. It is also paramount to contingency planning for the most worst case of scenarios. This would include things like losing your primary funding sources, failure of a program, adverse legal challenges, and more. The American Society of Association Executives also heavily touts scenario planning to its members. They share that exploring this method of thinking can help nonprofits to stimulate discussion, accelerate collective learning, set strategic direction, solidify decisions, and bring a culture of alignment among stakeholders. Our approach to scenario planning consists of 4 steps or phases. First, we should consider the unknowns. We can do this by looking at a series of 3 questions. First, what situations could have the biggest impact on your organization? This may be issues that are occurring now, past events that you want to prepare for if they should happen again, or even hypothetical future concerns that you've never experienced. You'll want to particularly consider things you would have no control over, like when gathering mandates occurred at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. Second, which of these scenarios would require the quickest decision should they arise? Since we can't do everything at once, we should have a way to make sure that our priorities are in order. And third, what is paramount to your work and mission? Nonprofit Quarterly calls this finding our Northern Star. After you've gone through what you don't know, it's time to identify your scenarios. Since we know that we can't do everything, we encourage you to focus on your top 2 or 3 most urgent concerns. This can be done holistically by looking at the entire organization or by breaking it down by different components of your club's strategic plan. With this in mind, you'll start to plot out your possible outcomes. These should be short, detailed, and plausible scenarios and written visualizations of how your club can and should adapt to each one. In doing this planning, you will want to gather feedback from as many stakeholders as possible, including those with programmatic, financial, development, operational, implementation, and communication knowledge. You should also outline the time frame you would need for your plan and a possible budget it would take to be successful. From there, we move into step 3, where we begin to fully select our path. It's only after we have mapped out a few scenarios that we can assess which feels the most necessary. Bridgespan.org says that it can be helpful to do this by looking at each key factor and deciding the likely range of various outcomes for a given element of strategy. It may be helpful to even give a rough probability for each. From there, we can systematically think through the effect each solution could have on our club. This includes impacts on budget, programs, investments, schedule, and strategic priorities. With our final phase, step 4, we identify the triggers. This is the final decision of what you will do, how you will do it, and when you will pull the proverbial trigger. Remember to keep leadership, any paid staff, and all other key decision makers involved during this critical stage. You want to make sure that you have buy-in from everyone and to ascertain that everyone understands what will happen if something was to actually occur. Once you've gone through your scenario planning process, keep in mind that your work isn't ever really over. Like we said earlier, it's a cycle that will be revisited time and time again, all in the name of the health of your organization. Conditions change, people evolve, and they move on. What we know can become what we don't know, and vice versa. Revisions may be necessary, and it's your organization's responsibility to make sure that they occur. We would especially like to encourage our clubs to focus on usefulness. Don't hesitate to eliminate those scenarios and/or solutions that no longer apply or make sense for the current state of your club. Don't be afraid to also identify new scenarios that may be needed to explore. It's only with constant monitoring of the environment around us that we can have the foresight we strive for with this important process. Foresight is incredibly important in any organization, and it only takes going through a crisis once to discover how critical scenario planning is in helping to prepare your club for how it should act in the most challenging of times. We hope that you will use some of the ideas presented in this session to think through internal and external factors that could suddenly but devastatingly impact your club. This is just one of many sessions designed with our Sertoma clubs in mind. You can find more videos and other resources like this one in our Members Center at sertoma.org. We also encourage you to network with other Sertomans in our Members Corner on Facebook using the link on the screen.